Even before Lisa Brummel, Microsoft's presentation, I had indeed planned to have a Microsoft-approved hologram appear here in place of me. But I had nothing better to do, so I decided, well, hell, I'll show up. Jason, in our one phone call we had before this, and I just have met him this afternoon, asked that I be totally spontaneous, no premeditated questions. So in that light, walking over from the Millennium Park garage about 2 hours ago, I was entranced by, I'm a newspaper guy at heart, by the totally hideous new design of USA Today. So I had to get it. Well, lo and behold, on page 1 this morning, there is a survey, Jason, of American workers, 4,000 employees, about why their tendency to lie about why they can't come to work on a certain day. Nearly a third of workers reported false ailments in order to play hooky during the past year. Nearly 1 in 6 ditched work, quote, to catch up on sleep, quote. Talking to human resource folks, among the more memorable excuses, employee was upset after watching the Hunger Games. Employee's dead grandmother was being exhumed for a police investigation. Employee's hair turned orange from dyeing her hair at home. So the seamless segue here is that you have some rather provocative thoughts, some of them articulated in a TED video that went viral a couple of years ago on the world of work and why it sucks in some ways. And it was sort of a rhetorical holy war on meetings and people like me, managers who wear neckties. I think I'm the only person, Chicago Ideas Week, who's wearing a necktie this week. Sorry for being so old-fashioned. Right. But what is your basic assessment of the world of work?
Well, the problem that I see with work is that people aren't fulfilled most of the time. They go to work, and it's 9 a.m., and all day long they're just interrupted. You know, interruption isn't fulfilling for anybody. So they're pulled into a meeting or they're pulled into a conference call and they have to do this, but they're supposed to get something else done, but instead they have another meeting and then they have another conference call, then someone screams their name across the office, and before you know it, it's like 5 o'clock and nothing got done. And so people are working at home on the weekends, they're going to coffee shops, they're making up excuses about their dead grandmother. I think that was one of them, right? And they're doing all this work outside of the office because the office is a horrible place to work. And that's just broken. That's totally broken. Offices have basically become interruption factories. You walk in the door and you get nothing done, and you have to work at night and on the weekends, and that just seems very wrong to me.
I was managing editor of the Chicago Tribune, and one of my trickiest personnel decisions always had involved people wanting to work from home. Yep. And I was an SOB when it came to that. And a lot of my thought had to do with the fact that I couldn't see that person there. I was dubious about whether he or she would be a self-starter and how productive they would be, a set of assumptions about the need for them to have physical daily oversight. Was I missing the boat in some ways?
Well, I don't know. You know, it's different. Depends on the industry you're in. But I think the key here is that if someone's doing meaningful work, the work should speak for itself. So what happens is the reason why people feel like, or managers feel like they need to watch over people is because it's very hard to actually judge the work that they do because the work they're doing is meaningless a lot of the time, unfortunately, right? So managers are like making sure they're doing something when instead, like if they were doing work that really mattered, that they really cared about, that they were really into, they'd be more than happy to show the work. And showing the work is all the proof you need to see that someone's working. They don't need to be at the office or in a desk. They just need to show work. And so I think it's sort of a symptom of the fact that a lot of people, a lot of companies aren't giving people meaningful work to do.
Get into some of the specifics of the way you operate. Today's Thursday. Don't you have some deal where for 5 or 6 months during the year, either people don't work half-day Thursday, or you don't talk during Thursdays? There's like 4 quiet hours or something?
Yeah.
What's the deal with that?
So May through October, we don't work on Friday. So we have 4-day work weeks. That doesn't mean that we compress more time into those 4 weeks. It actually, in those 4 days, it means we just work normal 8-hour days for 4 days and then take Fridays off. And then, we do a bunch of other things like that too. But the point of that is not to the point is there's a lot of points, but one of the reasons is because what you'll find out is that the same amount of work gets done in 4 days than would normally get done in 5 days. And when you compress the week in a way where you're not asking people to work more hours, but actually work fewer hours, they squeeze out all this wasted time that they usually spend doing this and that. And then also managers have to realize that they can't spend more time in meetings and in conference calls and stuff that doesn't matter because there's just less time to do the work. So by squeezing the week, you automatically force yourself to work on stuff that's more important, and you use your time better. It's like when your time becomes more of a limited resource, you don't waste it, just like other resources that are limited.
What about the quiet time stuff? What is that?
The quiet time. So at our office, we don't talk to each other. So that's sort of the quiet time stuff. We have a big, here's the thing. I think that if you walk into most offices, they're very loud. They're very sort of, there's phones going off and people calling each other's names and whatnot. But if you look at the places where you're supposed to learn, like libraries and classrooms, they're often really quiet. You walk into a library and everyone respects everyone's quiet and privacy. They respect everyone's ability to have their own space where they can read and think. But you go into an office and there's nothing going on like that at all. It's just the opposite of a library. I believe that work should be a place to learn too, not just talk and work, but a place to learn as well. And so we want to create an environment in our office that's more like a library. So we sort of follow library rules. So we don't really talk to each other during the day unless someone needs to talk to someone else, and then we go into a little private room like people have at libraries where they can go and have a discussion but not interrupt everybody else. So we're very focused on cutting out as many opportunities to interrupt as possible.
So if it's Sally's quiet time and she's not answering email, but I really goddamn need to talk to her.
Yeah.
I can do that?
The truth is that you probably don't have to talk to her. And that's the reality, I think, is that there are very few emergencies where someone needs to talk to someone right now. What we do is we shift it. So we shift all of our communication to what we would call passive communication, where we'll send an email or we'll post something to Basecamp or we'll do something else. And then when the other person's ready to receive that message, they'll receive it and they'll write back. Because it's really an arrogant thing to interrupt someone else who's doing their work. So if I'm working on something and I want to ask someone else a question, and I ask them a question in the middle of their work, what I'm saying is that whatever I have to ask you is more important than what you're doing. And that's often not the case. So I'd much rather ask the question and wait for that person to find the time to get back to me. And so we have a much slower form of communication than I think most companies do. And I found that it's a better way to work because you don't break people's days into smaller and smaller bits. Instead, you give them hours and hours to work unobstructed, uninterrupted, and they get a lot more work done. And then when they get back to you, they get back to you.
Is it safe to say that, or will you concede in any way that some of this may not be perfectly applicable to other work settings?
Absolutely.
Like,
yes.
Basic training for the Marines. And, brutishly stripping these guys of any sense of individuality so they can learn how to be part of a team. Or the Bears up in Lake Forest. I mean, Lovie Smith wants the defense, and where's Urlacher? Oh, he's no email. He can't talk to Urlacher. Or merge ER staff on the South Side.
Sure.
And on and on.
Yes, there are certainly circumstances where this doesn't apply, but they're the exception. Most people work in an office building. You look around, you walk out the front door here. There's office buildings everywhere. We're not talking about boot camps or sports teams. We're talking about work. Everyone's working in these buildings, in these offices with managers, full of meetings and the whole thing. So I think that while there are absolutely conditions where this doesn't apply, I think a lot of people could learn a lot from sort of some of these ideas and give this stuff a shot. So something you alluded to earlier was this idea of quiet Thursdays or whatever. And so I know a lot of people can't just go off and shut everyone up at work. That's just not going to happen. But one thing you can try is somehow try to have a quiet afternoon the first Thursday of every month. So the first Thursday of every month, if you have the power at your office to say nobody can talk, what you'll find is that everyone will look forward to that afternoon, that one Thursday a month afternoon, because they'll get work done, They won't feel rushed, they won't feel stressed out, and then you can maybe make that a full Thursday, and then maybe you can do it every other week, and then maybe you can do it once a week, and just these little small victories will start to pile up, and I think that people can definitely do some of the stuff even though they think they might not be able to.
Now, total coincidence, you mentioned libraries and you wanted me to be spontaneous. After I dropped the 3-year-old at preschool this morning and the 3rd grader at his separate school, I was reading a New York Times style section story this morning on the head of the New York Public Library who got the job, and 2 seconds later he was caught for DUI in Harlem or something. He's had a lot of problems. But anyway, he's taking the New York Times reporter through one of the great rooms at the New York Public Library, the main branch. The famous reading room. And he looks at all the people in the reading room and turns to the New York Times reporter and asks and says rhetorically, why are they here? Well, partly they're here for computers and Wi-Fi, but mostly they're here because it's an unbelievably inspiring space and because people actually want to work in inspiring spaces together, not at home alone. And that's not going to change. What do you think of that?
I think there's a lot of truth to that also. I think that the places you work and the things you surround yourself with have a huge influence on the work that you do. And I think this is another problem with traditional office spaces, which are that they're very gray and they're very monotone and they're very boring. And that seeps into people. So I think it's really important that offices matter. If you're going to have an office, it ought to be inspirational. It ought to have some meaning to it. And so I love beautiful rooms. I love beautiful libraries. I love that stuff. But I don't think that it's fair to make blanket statements about everyone should work at the office or everyone should work at home or things aren't going to change. The truth is everyone's very, very different. And some people prefer to work at home. Some people prefer to work at the office. Some people prefer to mix it up. Some people prefer to work on planes. Some people prefer to work on their daily commute. And I think the key is if you're a manager, you should understand that everybody is different, and people should work where they're most comfortable and get the best work done. Because at the end of the day, I want people to do the best work they possibly can. I want people to do the best work of their careers when they work at 37 Signals. And if they're not going to do the best work of their careers at the office, but they can do it at home, why wouldn't I want them to work at home? So that's my sort of feeling. Everyone should just sort of do what they feel best doing.
Which sort of prompts a question that came from that very, I thought, provocative end of Lisa Baumel of Microsoft's presentation, where she was talking about managers having to learn how to communicate with and lead workforces that aren't physically there, which is, I mean, obviously a real challenge. I never, had to learn those sort of skills. What are your thoughts on that? Because it really speaks of the need for a new sort of manager.
Absolutely. It's hard probably. See, I'm sort of fortunate that I've always worked this way. But I can imagine how difficult it would be for me to change into a place like where she might work compared to what she does trying to work the way I work. So I think the key with this stuff is you've got to take these really small steps. And you can't expect anyone to make drastic changes in their life or at work or in their managerial styles overnight. It just doesn't work. So I think the key is that if you want to learn how to adapt to a new way of working or whatever, is you take small, tiny steps, try one little thing. If you can't spare an afternoon once a month, I think there are deeper problems in your business. You have to leave time for experimentation. You have to have slack. You can't be running at capacity all the time because then you'll just always do what you've always done, and that's not going to get you anywhere. So I'm a big fan of slack and of having people actually sometimes have nothing to do, I think is a very valuable thing.
How about, though, if that ends up changing their relationship to you, the employer? I thought one of the more interesting slides and all those things that were whizzing by from Kelly Greer of Ernst & Young was the one, I think something like 69%, I think it's prediction, or 69% of workers will be less loyal to the companies they work for, and then you're going to have that presumably compounded by this proclivity to hire contractors. What are the implications of that? Okay, let's say 10 years from now, you're much bigger than you are today in your company, and folks just really don't give much of a damn about working for you. It's just work, and they're at home doing their thing.
Yeah, I mean, you just don't want to get there, I guess is the thing. Like, we're 35 people intentionally. We could have 100, we could have 200 if we wanted to, but I don't want that. And so I think what's important is And I thought that slide, that was actually a really interesting number, the reduction in loyalty. And I think that's just a sign of a deeper problem, which is that a lot of employers don't treat their employees like adults. They treat them like children. So people are young, they go to school, and they're treated by adults like children, as they are when they're in school. They get out of school, they go to college, and they go to work, and they're treated like children again. There's very little respect for people's time, for people's work, for people's point of view, for people's ideas. And I think that's why a lot of people get tired of jobs really quickly, is they don't feel like they're respected and really valued. So I think it's really important for every employer to think about how to treat people with respect in a way that they're able to do the best work of their careers. Because people don't want to leave if they're doing their best work. People leave when they're not doing their best work and they think there's better work to be done. So if you can create an environment where people can do the best work of their careers, they're less likely to leave.
Let me, we're finishing up here. Let me end up, I don't want to get too philosophical here, but let me ask you a question about something that kind of concerns me, and that is the whole notion of community and fracturing of community. We live in a world where you might live in a suburban cul-de-sac in Schaumburg and come into the central city to work. Kids go to school in one town. You go to the Costco in a second town. You take them to soccer practice, Saturdays. In another town, you really don't know your neighbors too well. The kids hang out at the entertainment center with the 50-foot high screen in the basement. It's a time in which church attendance is down, newspaper readership is down, voter turnout is down, a lot of traditional indicators of civic engagement are down. I don't want to discount the significance of social media in altering that landscape and creating new communities. But what about that? A sense of community in a world in which something that traditionally was sort of very important to our sense of community, the workplace, becomes something of a very different sort, and we become more sort of independent contractors.
I share your concern there. I think that there are some deep long-term implications of people not knowing their neighbors and not seeing people around, and not shopping at local stores and all those things. I think those are serious potential long-term problems. And then the flip side is that I met my business partner over the internet. He lives in Denmark, and we worked together for 4 years without ever meeting each other. And then now he lives in Chicago. He finally moved to Chicago, but 37 Signals as it is today would not have existed had I not met David in Denmark, because he was reading a blog that I was writing because he was a fan of the company, but he'd heard about us from someone else online. Like, there's all these really interesting connections that are happening. So what I would love to see is a society or a world where both these things can exist together and help each other. I think that when social media replaces in-person conversations and dinners and sitting around a fireplace and talking, that's a negative. But I think if you can sit around a fireplace and talk and go have dinner and then also connect when you're not physically in the same place, then that's a good thing. So I think it's more about the combination has to happen. If one replaces the other, I think we're in trouble.
As we leave, Jason really has some really provocative, interesting thoughts on this. There's a TED video that you can Google and get, Jason Fried, a couple of years ago, a New York Times column he did called Be More Productive, Take Time Out. I want to thank you very much for being here, and since tonight is date night for me, I'm going to have to run. But we'll be selling a hologram of myself outside if you want to take a meeting with me. Thanks a million. Bye.
Thank you.